Hello, everybody. We're going to go through the last of the immigration questions from the website. So this part I called Wave 4 of immigration, but it actually started with this period from 1930 to 1965 where immigration slowed way down. Just to go into a couple of reasons here is one of the biggest things that happened during this time was the Great Depression. So there were no jobs available, and this impacted much of the world, but hit the United States very hard. And when there were no jobs available, obviously that attracted less people, but also that made the government very resistant to allowing anybody in. You know, there wasn't enough work for who those were here. We also have to mention here the quota laws from the 1920s. So during and this is an important one to understand, starting at the end of Wave 3, they passed a law called the quota laws, which set how many people were allowed to come. And they decided that those limits would be set based on how many people were here, but they used data from before Wave 3. So groups of people that came a lot in Wave 3, like Italians and Russians and so on, were really limited in the quota because they looked at the time before that. So with the quota law, if you were German, if you were from Great Britain, you had a pretty good chance of getting in. If you were from Italy or Russia or Eastern Europe, it was a little bit harder. And if you were from China, Japan, if you were not white, it was virtually impossible to get in during this time. We also have the world wars. While war does drive people away, during World War II, passing across the Atlantic was not very safe. So that really limited things as well. But this period from 1930 to 1965, as you saw in those charts, was a much slower, a lot fewer people coming. So it's kind of an interesting one. Wave 1 was small, Wave 2 bigger, Wave 3 was humongous, and then Wave 4, they pretty much, to use the door analogy, they slammed the door shut on most people during that time. Now, come 1965, President Lyndon Johnson passed a new law, a law that still drives immigration today. In 1965, they switched the whole system around. This law removed the racial bias of previous immigration law. Meaning, prior to this, going all the way back to 1790, I don't know if you remember, one of the first laws passed was basically if you were white, you were allowed in. And while laws had changed over time, there was always this racial bias. I mean, you see that with the Chinese Exclusion Act. If you came from Europe, you had a much better chance of getting in because you looked like the people that were already here. In 1965, that was thrown out. Preference was given to those with education, those who had family here already, and instead of this many Germans, this many Italians, it was an overall number of people that were allowed to come in. So it really evened the playing field. And a lot of you notice then that when you get to question 3, what do you notice about the chart for Wave 3? You see people coming from Asia and Central and South America. And not so many people from Europe. So it is in 1965 with this law that you begin to see the diversity of immigrants go way up. A lot more people that were no longer all from Europe or mostly from Europe. Someone else noticed, I thought this was very noteworthy, that the pace of immigration grew steadily. If you look at the other charts, they're very zigzaggy up and down, where because this law set a set number of people, that the graph was much more consistent. As far as you can see that a handle was gotten on how many people were allowed into the country. So thought that was a very interesting note. Now in the final paragraph there were a couple of questions. One of them, and these are very similar to what was in the video yesterday, should the door to immigration remain open? Does the United States have a duty to keep that door open? That has obviously been and I hope you can realize this is not just a last 5-year question about immigration. This has gone on for 150 years, probably even longer. Who should be allowed to come, how many, and so on. And a lot of you hit on some of the key points yesterday. You know, how do we make sure that the people being admitted are safe? That how do we make sure people who are coming from places that are really bad can come in, but also, you know, making sure that they can be provided for in the United States. Those are all some very good questions. The second one, should people who arrive be expected to lose their culture, change their to change their culture? This is another one of those that makes me kind of sad, because if we were together, there's some interesting activities that I wanted to do with this, because I think the answer probably can't be absolutely one way or the other. You know, if people who immigrated never changed their culture at all, if they never tried to adopt any of the ways things are done here, that wouldn't work very well. But at the same idea, expecting people to completely lose their culture, to give up everything, is probably not right either. That it's an answer that's somewhere in the middle, and of course something that people argue about. Still is, a very simple one. Should people be expected to learn English or not? Some people would say, yeah, to function in our country, you need to speak the language of the country. Others would say, what difference does it make as long as they can communicate? So, all right, that is your answers for the final set today. And again, I hope this is useful to you as you complete the wave summary grid that I sent you today.